Hello there, people of the internet. Today we're going to talk about casting bullets. Now, just because of YouTube rules, there's certain things that I can't go into, and I got to be really careful as I walk along the line and talk about this particular topic. So, YouTube reviewer, I'm sure you're watching this. Please take note. I'm going out of my way to make sure that I do not break any of YouTube's rules. So, normally, whenever I cast my own bullets, I'm using something like this right here. This is, well, it's a bullet mold. They're not very expensive. You can find them in basically any caliber that you want to find them in. In this particular case, this one is looks like a 44 caliber round ball. But they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and things like that. So, the long and short of it is you melt down your lead or your lead alloy, which we'll talk about here in a second, and you pour that into your mold right here. Again, I cannot show you guys the actual process of that because of YouTube rules. And then this right here, this little, I'm not even sure what you would call this little pivoting spot, you push that forward, and that cleanly cuts a little piece off of your now molded lead bullet. Then you open this up, your lead bullet falls out, and now you have yourself a round of lead. There's certain lubrications and things that you can do to these, which again we'll get into here in just a second. Whenever you're casting your own lead bullets, with these right here, what I normally do, I take the actual metal part of this and I set it into the lead, like the actual molten lead itself, for 5 minutes or so, just so the temperature of this raises to the same point of the lead. And that is important. I'll show you guys why right here. Don't worry, I know I'm off camera, but I'm just grabbing something real quick. So that is important because if you don't do that, you're going to get imperfections in your bullet because the lead cools too fast before it is done, like, settling into the shape of a bullet. And I have no idea how well this is going to come up on screen here. This is a really good one. This is our projectile, and you see the significant imperfections on it right there. That is, well, technically speaking, if this was lead, that would be from an incorrectly temperatured mold. But these right here are actually not lead bullets, and I'm not going to tell you guys what these are because these are for a video in the future, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, I've known about lead casting for a good long while, and I've done it, oh, I don't know, a time or two over the past couple of years, but lately I've been getting, like, pretty heavily into it because I've got a lot of lead, and I got a lot of molds, so I may as well just get around to molding my own projectiles. There's a couple of different ways that you can melt your lead. Normally, for the longest time, I just used like a cast iron skillet in a fire, and then I would have a cold spoon, like a cold stainless steel spoon, like the same sort of spoon that you pick up at Walmart and that you use at your dinner table. I would grab one of those. And I would want like a tablespoon or something like that because you always want to hold more lead than you actually need. And that's what I would use to pour into the lead mold. I would want a cold spoon because the cold spoon, the lead won't stick to it. If it's hot, then you're going to start dealing with sticky problems. But if you are dealing with stickiness, then lead is pretty gosh darn easy to melt, so you can just melt it right off of your spoon. Now, more often than not, I cast my rounds out of wheel weights just because I have a lot of them, especially thanks to a certain friend of mine. He gifted me a bunch of wheel weights, so that's one of the main reasons why I've gotten back into casting so heavily. On top of that, he also gave me some other stuff, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But I normally make my rounds out of wheel weights. Wheel weights is not pure lead. Typically, if you're casting bullets, you don't want to use pure lead because pure lead is really, really, really soft. If you're shooting pure lead, you have to stay at lower velocities. Otherwise, as the bullet passes through the rifling, the soft lead bullets will just kind of tear itself apart inside of the rifling because of those fast velocities. If you keep like the velocities down low, then you'll be fine. But more often than not, people will make a lead alloy for their projectiles just to kind of make the lead a little bit harder without sacrificing any of the ease of casting, if that makes sense. A lot of times people will add like zinc or they'll add tin or something like that in order to have a secondary alloy in the lead. So the bullets themselves would be like 95% lead and then 5% whatever else. Wheel weights, they tend to be like 0.5 to 1% tin and like 4% antimony. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's what it looks like in the English language whenever I read it read off of a piece of paper. So it's like 95% lead and then 5% other things. So it's a fairly strong lead alloy. Not the strongest, but a fairly strong lead alloy. I've had really good luck with wheel weights, pushing the velocities out to probably about, well, let's go ahead and get into that. These are some 130 grain projectiles that I casted not too terribly long ago. And I did it because, well, I wanted 130 grain projectiles because I've got a couple of 308s that have a 1 in 14 twist. And I also load black powder 308. Now, these right here, since they're just the straight lead bullets, they do have their limitations. These right here, I'd say probably about 1,500 feet per second, maybe, is as fast as I would want to push these, which is perfect for the black powder 308 loadings that I'm currently using, because that's about the velocity you would expect from black powder. I have these lubed up. Typically with my black powder rounds, if I'm just using lead for black powder, I'll actually lube them up with like lard. I think that's normally what I go to, but basically any kind of tallow or fat will work. I go with lard because it's cheap and abundant and available, and I can go to the grocery store and get it with very, very little problem. But if I want my rounds to go faster, like let's say I want to start getting into smokeless powder territory, you absolutely could. These are some cast loads from a buddy of mine. His name is Steve. I have no idea what the alloys are on them. But if you look at the back, you're going to see this little copper, we're going to call it a copper cup, there on the back of the projectiles. Those are gas checks, and you put them on the rear of your lead bullets, and that allows you to increase the velocities of your round pretty significantly. With just a straight lead alloy round, like what my black powder rounds are right here, I'd say 1,500 feet per second is like probably about the maximum that you would want to go. I'd probably want to keep it more around 14, but I'll be fine, especially because they're lube bullets. Versus something with a gas check, these right here, you could push more like 2,200 feet per second because they got that gas check on them. If you want to use smokeless rounds, this is definitely the way to go. Now, you can go out, you can cast your own bullets and whatnot, and there's plenty of cartridges out there that you can run these just straight cast bullets in. But like I said, if you want to start looking at smokeless stuff, gas check is the way to go. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of leading inside of your barrel. Now, if you get a bunch of leading inside your barrel, it's really easy to clean out. People act like it's a huge deal, but it's not. You can look it up on Google. I found a concoction that works extraordinarily well. I use a 50-50 mix of vinegar and hydrogen peroxide. And what that does is it actually dissolves lead. It's not going to hurt your barrel at all, but it'll dissolve the lead inside of your barrel. And as a result of that, you get rid of any leading inside your barrel. So it is actually quite easy to clean out. Or you could do what I do many times, and after a long day of firing lead bullets, I'll, load a like a copper jacketed round or something like that, and I'll fire, say, 4 or 5 of those through the rifle in order to help clear out that leading. There's a bunch of different ways that you can get leading out of a rifle, but assuming that you're not hot rodding these to like full-fledged smokeless powder velocities, then you shouldn't have any issues with your lead projectiles. Like, for example, these 308 rounds, I definitely would not want to load these into like a 30-06 with, I don't know, 47 grains of 4064 behind it, and send that bad boy downrange, screaming out the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. Maybe even faster since it's a 130 grain bullet. Like, that's a really good way to get a lot of leading inside your barrel really, really quickly. But for the velocities that I am planning to achieve with this, along with the distances that I shoot at and the things that I shoot at, this right here is just my range plinking ammo, although I could use it for more practical purposes. Like, I wouldn't feel bad about taking a pig or a hog or something like that with one of my black powder 308 rounds. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll do that on my next hunting trip. That might be fun. But if I were to load these up with like some smokeless rounds, then I absolutely could throw some gas checks on these. And then I could load my 308 rounds, or maybe even load them into like a 30-30 or something like that, to where I could get 2,000 to 2,200 feet per second without needing to worry about any real significant issues. I think the slowest I've ever been able to get like a smokeless round for 308 is probably about 2,500 feet per second, and with a gas check, that's still pretty booking it. A lot of the things that I cast and that I do, I normally just load those with black powder, just because I make my own black powder and I can load those cartridges extraordinarily cheap and easy. That's normally my routes, but I absolutely could go the smokeless route, and I have gone the smokeless route with smokeless or with cast bullets before. What you could do is you could do, I'm sure Steve's going to chime in on this down below, he's going to talk about essentially setting up some gallery loads, and you use a fast-burning, say, pistol powder or shotgun powder or something like that inside of your case. You don't get the full velocities of that case, but you also get the benefits of smokeless powder. Like, for example, I make gallery loads with a bunch of different cartridges. With these 130 grain projectiles, I'd probably load 6 to 8 grains of something like tight group inside of my brass cases for my 308, and that would give me a good little gallery load. We wouldn't get a whole lot of power or a whole lot of velocity, but I mean, it'd be a good squirrel getter or something like that. But that's a good way to be able to use smokeless powder with these rounds. I would probably chronograph it. Speaking of, I got myself a new chronograph. Video's coming soon. This area is just a little magneto speed, but from what I have been able to figure out, it should work pretty gosh darn good. So I should be able to figure out like proper velocities for all of the things that I'm doing and proper smokeless powder charges and things like that. So I think that this is going to be like a whole series of videos while I test things out. Anyway, as far as bullet casting goes, keep actual like full-on lead projectiles, like 100% lead, keep those under 1,000 feet per second. Any lead alloys, keep those under 1,500 feet per second. Typically, the just straight lead rounds, you want to use black powder for those. You can use smokeless, just pay attention to velocities. If you gas check them, then you can start really going into the smokeless powder categories. There's plenty of dyes out there, so you can make your own gas checks, or you can go out and purchase them for not a lot of money. I cannot tell you guys where that's at. YouTube reviewer, take note on how I'm not doing that, so I'm not breaking any rules. Besides that, I don't think I have much else to add. A whole lot of my casting is these round balls, just because I love going out and I love shooting my muzzle loaders. I got a bunch of round balls, and I mean, they're all black powder and whatnot. So the velocities are fine. For black powder, lubing them up with some kind of tallow or something like that is a really good way to go. If you're going the smokeless powder route, you might want something a little bit more lube-worthy. Typically, smokeless powder casts, I get really good results if I stick like some candle wax in there. Just melt down some wax and put a few drops in there and rub all your projectiles together so it's nice and even and coated. And that right there seems to work as a pretty gosh darn good lubricant as well. Or you can go out and actually hunt down some proper lubricant for your cast projectiles if that's the route that you want to go. The reason why I do casting is because casting is significantly cheaper than going out and purchasing a bunch of rounds. It all really depends what's on the market. If I can buy like a bulk box of say 1,000 bullets for 10 cents a shot, then, you know, maybe factory seconds or something like that, then I'll go ahead and I'll grab those if they're like on sale or something. But if nothing like that's on the market, then I'm like, all right, well, I'll break out the old mold and the casters and things like that, and I'll go make myself a batch of projectiles, and this will be what I use this weekend whenever I go to the range or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I started doing that, and then I'm like, I wonder what else would work in this bullet mold, and that's going to be a story for a whole other time. And now I've just kind of like heavily gotten into my bullet mold casting. I'm going to start doing a bunch of 357s and a bunch of 44s, just because I feel like those right there are like the pinnacle of cast projectiles. Like, you get the best velocity with the least amount of leading. You get the best power. Like, it's just such a good... So we're going to be checking those out later. Thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. I'm sure someone's going to ask what I use to actually melt my lead. I know I said I used a cast iron skillet. Nowadays, I got this fancy electric... It's almost like an electric kiln. Am I using that word properly? Whatever. Hopefully you guys understand what it is I'm trying to say here. But it's like this crucible that has electricity flowing through it that heats it up to the temperature for melting lead. And then you toss your lead ingots, in this particular case that I'm using, I toss lead ingots made from these wheel weights into there. And then it's got like a little lever on the bottom that you can open it up and the molten lead pours out. It's a really convenient setup. Definitely way more convenient than using the cast iron skillet that I used to use. Alright, I already did the outro. Bye, guys.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.